A single pregnant mother left coffee on her boss's desk until he discovered who she was. Forbidden feelings awakened, and their lives changed forever. A story of love and destiny that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and comment on where you are watching from. The alarm clock rang at 5:30 in the morning, cutting through the silence of the two-room apartment in East Los Angeles like a sharp blade. Sarah Johnson stretched her slender arm to silence the noise, feeling the June chill seep through the cracks of the poorly sealed window. Her fingers found the device on the makeshift nightstand, a cardboard box covered with a floral fabric that her mother had embroidered years ago. "Another day," she whispered to herself, running her hand over her still flat belly. 3 weeks had passed since 2 pink lines confirmed what her body already knew. 3 weeks since her life had changed completely, although no one around her suspected a thing. Sarah got up carefully, avoiding the creak of the bed that might wake Mrs. Johnson, her mother, who slept in the next room, separated only by a plastic curtain. The cold floor made her bare feet contract, but she was used to it. Since she was 16, when she started working as a cleaner to help at home, early mornings like this had become part of her routine. In the tiny bathroom, she looked at herself in the cracked mirror. There she was, straight brown hair pulled back into a simple ponytail, light brown skin marked by fatigue, dark eyes that held dreams larger than her circumstances allowed. At 28, Sarah possessed a quiet beauty, the kind that went unnoticed in the bustling city, but that shone brightly when she smiled, which had been happening less frequently lately. "You can do this," she said to her reflection, a phrase she repeated every morning since deciding to change her life 2 years ago. Back then, working as an administrative assistant at Titan Enterprises seemed like an impossible dream for a girl from East Los Angeles who had barely finished high school. But Sarah had something that no diploma could teach, a determination that made her study late into the night after exhausting work shifts, a sensitivity that allowed her to understand people with just a glance, and a pride that prevented her from accepting anything that felt like charity. By 6 o'clock, she was already at the bus stop on Itapecerica Road, watching the city slowly awaken. Los Angeles in June showed its cruelest face. Dry, cold, grey skies, air thick with pollution that made her eyes sting. The still, empty streets echoed the distant sound of traffic that would soon transform into urban chaos. Sarah pulled her wool coat tighter against her body, feeling a slight nausea rise in her throat, another reminder of the new life growing inside her. During the hour-and-a-half journey to downtown, she mentally rehearsed what she would say if someone asked about the morning sickness she had been disguising for days. "It must be something I ate yesterday," she practiced softly as the crowded bus swayed along the highways. The smell of sweat mixed with cheap perfume and reheated coffee from the passengers made her stomach churn, but she took a deep breath and focused on the gradually changing landscape, from the simple houses of the outskirts to the mirrored skyscrapers dominating the financial center. At 7:15, Sarah got off at the downtown station and walked 3 blocks to the business complex where Titan Enterprises was located. The 26-story building loomed imposingly against the Los Angeles sky, entirely clad in tinted glass that reflected the heavy clouds. At the main entrance, Mr. Johnson was already waiting for her with a knowing smile. "Good morning, young lady. First one here, as always," he said, unlocking the revolving door. "What dedication, huh? The boss should give you a raise." "Good morning, Mr. Johnson. The work won't do itself, right?" Sarah replied, forcing a smile. If he knew she arrived early, not just out of dedication, but to perform a secret ritual that no one else knew about, he would surely find it strange. The silent lobby echoed the sound of her synthetic leather shoes against the marble. Sarah always felt small there, surrounded by towering columns, exotic plants, and a reception area that seemed larger than her entire home. But today, with the secret she carried, she felt especially vulnerable, as if everyone could read the truth she hid so carefully on her face. In the elevator, she pressed the button for the 25th floor, the penultimate, reserved for the executive board. Her desk was on the 22nd, but Sarah had a different destination this morning, as she had on all the other mornings for the past 14 months. The elevator doors opened to reveal a spacious corridor adorned with modern artworks that cost more than her annual salary. Sarah walked to the executive kitchen, a place she knew well from her time as a cleaner. The black granite countertops gleamed under the ceiling lights, contrasting with the dark wood cabinets and state-of-the-art appliances. She went to the cabinet where she kept her secret treasure, a package of specialty coffee from Napa Valley, which she religiously bought every month with part of her savings. The aroma of the roasted beans filled her nostrils as she prepared the ritual that had become sacred. 2 heaping tablespoons, water at the exact temperature, 3 minutes of waiting. No sugar. She had learned that he preferred it bitter, observing him discreetly during meetings where she served coffee to the executives. While waiting for the coffee to brew, Sarah took a small piece of paper from her pocket, where she had written a phrase the night before. Faith moves mountains, but it is perseverance that climbs them, one stone at a time. Her small, neat handwriting danced across the cheap paper. Carefully chosen words, carefully from the self-help books she borrowed from the public library on weekends. At 7:25, carrying the white porcelain cup with steaming coffee and the folded note beside it, Sarah ascended to the 26th floor. The CEO's office occupied half the floor, with windows offering a panoramic view of the city. The executive assistant wouldn't arrive until 8, so she had the corridor to herself. The door to the main office was ajar, as always. Sarah quietly entered the space that intimidated and fascinated her at the same time. The solid mahogany desk dominated the room, surrounded by shelves filled with books on management and economics, trophies from various business awards, and photographs of him with important personalities. Behind the presidential chair, the view from the window showed Los Angeles waking up. Traffic beginning to intensify, the lights of the buildings turning on one by one, life pulsing in every corner. Sarah placed the cup exactly in the center of the desk, next to the computer mouse, and left the folded note resting on the saucer. For a few seconds she stood there, imagining what it would be like when he arrived and found yet another anonymous offering. Did he smile when reading her messages? Had he already discovered who was leaving the coffee? Would he ever— "Stop, Sarah," she murmured to herself, pushing away dangerous thoughts. "He doesn't even know you exist." But that wasn't entirely true. 14 months ago, on a rainy Friday in April, she was in the elevator carrying a stack of contracts to file when he entered on the 15th floor. The elevator was crowded, and when it stopped abruptly between floors, all the papers slipped from her hands, scattering across the floor. As the other passengers grumbled impatiently, he bent down and helped her pick up the documents, his hands briefly brushing against hers. "Be careful with those important papers," he had said with a half-smile, handing her the last sheet. "The company doesn't run without them." "I'm sorry, sir. Thank you for your help," she replied, feeling her face heat up. "Richard," he had gently corrected. "You can call me Richard." Since then, Sarah couldn't forget either the deep timbre of his voice or the subtle scent of his imported cologne. And it was on that day that the coffee ritual began, a silent way to repay his kindness, and perhaps maintain an invisible connection with the man who occupied her thoughts more than he should have. Leaving the executive office, Sarah took a deep breath and adjusted the white blouse she had bought on sale, trying to hide the curves that were beginning to change subtly In 2 hours, he would arrive and find the warm coffee waiting for him, never imagining that the woman preparing it carried within her a part of him that would be born in a few months. The empty corridor echoed her hurried footsteps back to the elevator. Another ritual completed, another day of secrets and silent hopes. Sarah still didn't know how she would tell him about the pregnancy, nor if she would ever have the courage to do so. For now, the morning coffee was her only form of love, anonymous, pure, and impossible to be rejected. As she descended to her floor, unconsciously touching her still flat belly, Sarah murmured a prayer learned from her mother. "Our Lady, protect my child, and give me the wisdom to do what is right." Outside, Los Angeles was fully awakening, and with it another day of dreams kept and realities that would soon need to be faced. Richard Smith arrived at the Titan Enterprises complex at 7 o'clock sharp, as he had done religiously for 5 years. The chauffeur opened the door of the black BMW, and he stepped out, adjusting his silk tie, taking a deep breath of the morning air in Los Angeles that carried the characteristic scent of the metropolis. A mix of concrete, fuel, and the promise of another day of corporate battles. At 35, Richard had the appearance expected of a successful CEO, 6 feet tall, with impeccably styled black hair, using imported gel, dark brown eyes. That could be intimidating in business meetings, or surprisingly gentle in unguarded moments. His lightly tanned skin betrayed weekends spent in Napa Valley at the family home, where he played tennis and tried to forget the pressures of the company he had inherited from his father. "Good morning, Mr. Smith," greeted the doorman, bowing slightly in a manner that always bothered Richard. He preferred simplicity, but knew that his position required a certain formality. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson. How's the family?" he asked, pausing for a few seconds. It was a habit he maintained since taking the presidency, to know all the first-tier employees by name, remember personal details, and create human bonds in the cold business environment. "Very well, sir. My granddaughter passed the medical entrance exam. Remember I mentioned it?" "Of course I remember. Please give her my congratulations. Medical school is tough, but I know she has determination." Richard smiled genuinely. These small interactions were one of the few things that made him feel connected to reality outside the corporate bubble. In the elevator alone, Richard allowed himself a few seconds of vulnerability. He observed his reflection in the polished mirror of the walls and saw what everyone else saw: success, power, control. But behind the impeccable facade, he struggled daily against the constant pressure to prove that he deserved to be there for his competence, not just because he was born with the right last name. Titan Enterprises had been founded by his grandfather in the 1960s, starting as a small construction company that grew to become a real estate investment conglomerate. When his father suddenly died of a heart attack 2 years earlier, Richard was forced to take over the presidency during a turbulent time. A scandal involving overpricing in public works had shaken the company's reputation, and the board of shareholders was watching him closely, waiting for any sign of weakness to question his leadership. "Trial," he murmured to himself, a word his Italian grandmother used when discussing life's challenges. "Everything is a test, Richard. Everything is a trial." The doors opened on the 26th floor, revealing the hallway that led to his private kingdom. Richard walked with firm steps on the dark grey carpet, nodding to the security cameras he had recently installed. Not out of paranoia, but from a growing curiosity about something that had been intriguing him for months. Upon entering his office, the first thing he noticed was the unmistakable aroma of freshly brewed coffee. There it was again, the white porcelain cup perfectly positioned in the center of his desk, gently steaming, accompanied by a small folded note that had become an integral part of his mornings. Richard hung his blazer on the elegant wooden coat rack and sat in the leather armchair that cost more than many economy cars. He carefully picked up the note, as if it were a precious archaeological artifact, and unfolded it slowly. The tiny, ornate handwriting danced across the cheap paper. Faith moves mountains, but it is perseverance that climbs them one stone at a time. An involuntary smile curved his lips. 14 months ago, when this began, he had assumed that some cleaning staff or cafe worker was simply being helpful, but as the weeks passed, he realized there was something different about it. The coffee was always perfect, not too bitter or too weak, at the exact temperature he preferred. And the messages seemed specially chosen for him, as if someone knew exactly what his soul needed to hear each morning. He took the first sip, closing his eyes, to savor it fully. It was special coffee, probably from Napa Valley, considering the aroma and smoothness. Whoever this mysterious person was, they had good taste and spent their own money on it. Company coffee definitely didn't have this quality. "Who are you?" he whispered to the air, looking out the panoramic window that offered a magnificent view of the city waking up. Down below, millions of people were starting another day of struggle, each carrying their own stories, dreams, and secrets. One of them came up here every morning, prepared this coffee with care, and left words that touched his soul in an inexplicable way. Richard opened his laptop and began reviewing the emails that had come in overnight. Meeting with the board at 9, video conference with Japanese investors at noon, project analysis for expansion in the afternoon. His schedule was a labyrinth of commitments that left little room for personal life, something his ex-fiancée, Emily, had made very clear before breaking off the engagement 6 months ago. "You married this company, Richard. There's no room for anyone else in your life," were her last words, before returning the diamond ring he had chosen at a jewelry store in Beverly Hills. Emily was the daughter of a judge, graduated in law from Stanford, with all the attributes that high society considered suitable for the wife of a CEO. But Richard discovered too late that social compatibility was not the same as emotional connection. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Helena, his executive assistant, letting him know she had arrived and was organizing the day's agenda. Helena was a 50-year-old woman, as efficient as a Swiss watch, who had worked at the company since before Richard was born. She knew all his habits, including the peculiarity of his morning coffee. "Helena, do you know who has access to my office before 8 in the morning?" he asked, as she entered with a folder of documents. "Besides me, only the night cleaning crew and security, sir. Why do you ask? Did something happen?" She frowned with concern, adjusting the reading glasses that hung around her neck on a gold chain. "No, nothing serious. Just curiosity." Richard decided not to mention the coffee and the messages. For some reason, he wanted to keep that mystery to himself, like a private treasure that no one else could touch. Helena observed him with the insight of someone who had known his moods for decades. "If I may say so, sir, you seem lighter lately, less tense. Whatever is happening, it's doing you good." Richard chuckled softly. "Really? I didn't know it was that obvious." "To someone who knows you as well as I do, yes. By the way, your mother called last night. She wants to know if you're coming to dinner on Sunday at her house." The mention of his mother made Richard sigh. Mrs. Margaret Smith was a 62-year-old lady who dedicated her life to social causes and finding a suitable wife. For her son, every week there was an intimate dinner with another eligible candidate in the matrimonial market of high society. "Tell her I'll try to make it, but no guarantees. And Helena?" He paused, weighing his words. "If she asks about Emily or my love life, be diplomatic. I'm not ready for another one of those conversations." "I completely understand, sir." Alone again, Richard turned his attention back to the note he still held. There was something about the handwriting that intrigued him, an almost feminine delicacy in the way the letters curved. He tucked the paper into the drawer where he kept all the others, 14 months of messages he read and reread in moments of high pressure. It was 8:15 when his personal phone vibrated. A message from his best friend, Marcelo Drummond, the family lawyer and his confidant since college. "Lunch today? I need to talk to you about that issue we discussed. It's urgent." Richard frowned. That issue was code for the investigation. Marcelo was discreetly conducting into the leak of privileged information that had nearly destroyed the company the previous year. Someone inside was passing confidential data to competitors, and they still hadn't discovered who. He typed back, "Confirmed. Place of choice. Always 1 p.m. She leaned back in the chair, taking another sip of the mysterious coffee that remained at the perfect temperature. Down below, the city buzzed with life, and somewhere in this urban labyrinth was the person who made her mornings special. A person who didn't know how much their small kindnesses meant to a man used to fighting alone against the world. "Whoever you are," she said aloud, raising her cup in a silent toast, "thank you for reminding me that there are still pure gestures in this world." The day was just beginning, and Richard Smith, CEO of Titan Enterprises, heir to a business dynasty, a man accustomed to having control over everything in his life, had no idea that the person responsible for his daily dose of hope was pregnant with his child, working just 2 floors below, keeping a secret that would change both of their lives forever. Sarah adjusted her blouse for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, trying to disguise the growing discomfort she felt in her chest. It was 9:15 in the morning, and she was at her desk on the 22nd floor, organizing documents for the quarterly meeting of the finance department, when a wave of nausea hit her like a punch to the stomach. "Breathe deeply, Sarah. It's just morning sickness," she murmured to herself, gripping the edge of the cheap laminate desk that contrasted sharply with the luxurious furniture of the upper floors. Around her, the environment buzzed with the typical hustle and bustle of a workday, printers running, phones ringing, conversations about spreadsheets and reports. "Are you okay, Sarah?" asked Julia, a co-worker at the desk next to hers. At 42, Julia was divorced, a mother of 2 teenage children, and possessed that practical wisdom of someone who had faced life alone. Her curly hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore the same navy blazer that Sarah had seen her wear for months. "Just a little discomfort. It must be something I ate yesterday," Sarah replied, forcing a smile. It was the same excuse she had been using for weeks, and she was starting to fear that someone would suspect. Julia watched her with that maternal look she had developed after years of raising children on her own. Interesting. That something you ate has been bothering you a lot lately. Are you sure that's all it is?" Before Sarah could respond, Ms. Martin's shrill voice echoed through the department. "Employees, the meeting starts in 15 minutes. I expect all reports to be ready and spreadsheets updated." Ms. Martin, coincidentally sharing the same name as Sarah's mother, but with a diametrically opposite personality, was the supervisor of the finance department. A 55-year-old woman, thin as a dry twig, who wore grey suits and low-heeled shoes that made an irritating noise against the linoleum floor. Her gold-framed glasses were always slipping down her nose, forcing her to push them back with a mechanical gesture that had become her trademark. "Sarah, you're responsible for presenting the 2nd quarter numbers," Ms. Martin continued, stopping in front of Sarah's desk with a severe expression. "I hope you haven't made any mistakes. Mr. Smith will be present at the meeting, and he does not tolerate inaccuracies." Sarah's heart raced at the mention of his name. "He will be at the meeting?" "Of course he will. It's a quarterly meeting, dear. All departments have to present reports to the board." Ms. Martin frowned. "Why the shocked face? You checked all the numbers, didn't you?" Yes, ma'am. I checked 3 times, Sarah replied, trying to control her voice. The thought of being in the same room as Richard, presenting numbers to him, made her feel both excited and terrified. What if he recognized her? What if he noticed something different about her? Julia waited for Miss Martin to walk away and whispered, "Relax, Sarah. You're the most competent one here. Your reports are perfect." "That's not what worries me," Sarah murmured, unconsciously touching her belly. It's complicated." "What's complicated?" "Oh, wait a minute." Julia narrowed her eyes, studying Sarah's face with renewed attention. "Sarah, can I ask you an indiscreet question?" "Depends on the question." "Are you pregnant?" The question dropped like a bomb in the small cubicle. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face, and her hands began to tremble slightly. "Why are you asking that?" "Because I've been through this twice, dear. Morning sickness, sore breasts. You keep adjusting your blouse, fatigue, and that look on your face like you're hiding a giant secret." Julia leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "And because you've been sneaking saltine crackers from the drawer for weeks." Sarah closed, her eyes, feeling tears, threatened to spill. Keeping the secret was becoming increasingly difficult, and the need to share the burden with someone was almost unbearable. "Julia, please don't tell anyone," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "Oh my God, Sarah, is it really true?" Julia held her hand gently. "How long? And does the father know?" "Almost 2 months. And no, he doesn't know." Sarah discreetly wiped her eyes, checking to see if anyone was watching. "It's complicated, Julia, very complicated." "Complicated how? Is he married? Doesn't want to take responsibility?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "Worse. He doesn't even know I exist." Before Julia could respond, Miss Martin clapped her hands to get attention. "Come on, people. Conference room now. And Sarah, bring those bank reconciliation reports too." The conference room on the 22nd floor was modest compared to the lavish boardrooms, but it still impressed Sarah every time she entered. A light wood oval table dominated the space, surrounded by blue fabric swivel chairs. The walls were adorned with company performance graphs and an official photo of the headquarters building. Sarah sat at the end of the table, nervously organizing her papers as other employees arrived. Every sound of footsteps in the hallway made her heart race, imagining if it would be him arriving. At 9:45, the door opened, and Sarah, the executive secretary, entered, followed by 2 men in suits. Marina immediately recognized the second, Richard Smith, impeccable as always, wearing a navy blue suit that probably cost more than her annual salary. His hair was perfectly styled, and he carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had just come out of a display window. "Good morning, everyone," Richard said, his deep voice echoing through the room. "I apologize for the delay. Let's get straight to the point so we don't prolong the meeting." Marina lowered her eyes, focusing intently on the papers in front of her. She could feel his presence in the room, the subtle scent of his cologne reaching her, even from across the table. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the report she needed to present. "We'll start with the second quarter financial report," announced Ms. Martin. "Marina Johnson will be responsible for presenting the consolidated figures." "Marina, please," Richard said, gesturing politely for her to begin. It was at that moment that their eyes met for the first time in 14 months. Marina felt as if the world had stopped for a few seconds. He was watching her intently, and she saw a flicker of recognition pass across his face. Very subtle, but it was there. "Mr. Smith," she began, her voice coming out lower than she intended. "The second quarter showed a significant recovery compared to the first, with a revenue growth of 12%. As she spoke, Marina gained confidence. The numbers were her specialty, and she had prepared that presentation meticulously, but she could feel his gaze on her, studying not just the data she was presenting, but her as well. "Excellent work," Richard said when she finished. "The figures are very well organized, and the analysis demonstrates a deep understanding of the factors involved. Congratulations on the quality of the report." "Thank you, sir," Marina replied, feeling her face heat up. It was the first time he had directed words at her since that day in the elevator, and the compliment made her feel a mix of pride and melancholy. The meeting continued with other departments presenting their reports. Marina tried to concentrate, but her mind kept drifting back to the moment he had praised her. There was something in his voice, a kindness that contrasted with the expected formality, that made her remember why she had fallen for him that one night they spent together. It was during the company's year-end party 8 months ago. Marina was helping to organize the event, decorating the hall, when he appeared alone, after most of the employees had already left. They had talked about the city, about dreams, about the difficulty of finding true connections in a metropolis like Los Angeles. A conversation that stretched into the early hours, fueled by wine and an unexpected intimacy that culminated in a night of passion neither of them ever mentioned again. "Marina," Ms. Martin's voice brought her back to the present. "Mr. Smith asked a question." "I'm sorry, sir. Could you repeat that?" Marina felt her face burn with embarrassment. Richard watched her with renewed curiosity. "I asked for your opinion regarding the implementation of the new bank reconciliation system. You work directly with this data. What would be the impact on the department's routine?" Marina took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. "I believe there will initially be a learning curve that may temporarily reduce our productivity, but in the long run, the system will automate processes that currently consume hours of manual work, allowing us to focus on more strategic analyses." "Perfect! Exactly what I expected to hear." Richard made some notes. "Sarah, schedule a meeting with the IT department so we can discuss the implementation details." When the meeting ended, Marina remained seated, organizing her papers while the others left. Julia passed by her and whispered, "Talk later," before heading for the door. Marina was almost out when she realized she had forgotten her pen on the table. As she turned to grab it, she found Richard standing near the door, as if he were waiting for her to approach. "Marina," he said softly, making her name sound different in his voice. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" Her heart raced. "Of course, Mr. Smith. I wanted to congratulate you again on your work, but also," he hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully, "I have the impression that we know each other from somewhere. Did you work in another department before?" Marina swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. I was part of the cleaning team before being transferred to administration." "Ah, yes. Now I remember." His eyes softened. "You were in the elevator that day. We had the mechanical issue. I helped you with the papers." "Yes, sir. Thank you again for your kindness." Richard was silent for a few seconds, as if he wanted to say something more. Finally, he nodded. "Well, keep up the excellent work. The company needs dedicated employees like you." "Thank you, Mr. Smith." When they finally left the room, Marina felt her legs wobble. Julia was waiting for her in the hallway, with an expression that mixed curiosity and concern. "Marie, you look as pale as a ghost." "What did he say?" "Nothing much, just congratulated me on my work." Marina leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath. "Julie, I need to tell you something about the baby's father." Julia grabbed her by the arm, leading her to a more private corner. "Go on, dear." Marina looked around, checking to see if anyone was nearby. Then, in a barely audible whisper, she said the words she had been holding on to for 2 months. "It's him, Julie. The father of my child is Richard Smith." Julia's eyes widened, her mouth opening in silent shock. For a few seconds, she stood completely still, processing the information Marina had just revealed. The hallway around them continued to bustle, with employees coming and going, oblivious to the drama unfolding in that discreet corner. "Oh my God, Murray," Julia whispered, gripping her friend's arm tighter. "Are you serious? Richard Smith, the CEO of the company?" Marina nodded, feeling tears threatening to escape again. "It was at the New Year's party. I was helping to clean up after everyone left, and he showed up. We talked, had a few drinks, and it happened." "Sarah, this is—" Julia ran her hand through her hair, clearly trying to absorb the magnitude of the situation. "This is huge. Does he know? Did you tell him?" "No, and I'm not going to tell him." Sarah shook her head vehemently. "Julia, think about it. I'm a former cleaner, daughter of a seamstress, living in East Los Angeles. He's the billionaire CEO of the company. What do you think will happen if I show up saying I'm pregnant with his child?" "But Sarah, he has a right to know, and you have a right to his support." "What support?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "He'll think I'm trying to pull a scam. That I want money. He'll kick me out and spread rumors that I'm a gold digger who tried to get pregnant on purpose to get cash." Julia fell silent for a moment, understanding the complexity of the situation. She knew well the prejudice women like them faced when involved with men from higher social classes. "So what are you going to do? Raise the child alone?" "It's what my mother always did. And look, it worked." Sarah straightened her shoulders, trying to show a confidence she didn't fully feel. "I have a good job now, savings set aside. I can take care of my child alone." "Sarah," Julia pulled her closer, speaking softly, "you're being too proud. That man has responsibilities too." Before Sarah could respond, they heard footsteps approaching. Ms. Martin appeared in the hallway, carrying a stack of folders and wearing her usual stern expression. "What are you two doing standing around? There's work to be done. Sarah, I need those reconciliation reports ready by 2 o'clock. "Yes, Ms. Martin. I'm heading back to my desk," Sarah replied, discreetly wiping her eyes. The two friends parted, but Julia made sure to whisper, "We'll talk later, okay? This isn't over." Back at her desk, Sarah tried to focus on the numbers dancing on her computer screen, but her mind was turbulent. The meeting with Richard had affected her more than she expected. Seeing the genuine interest in his eyes when she presented the report, hearing his sincere compliments, feeling that subtle connection that had emerged between them at the New Year's party. All of it made the reality that she could never reveal the truth even more painful. Around noon, when the activity on the floor slowed due to lunchtime, Sarah decided to go up to the 26th floor. It wasn't her usual routine. She always made coffee in the early morning, but she felt the need to be near him, even if invisibly. The executive hallway was quiet, and she could hear muffled voices coming from Richard's office. She approached discreetly and recognized another man's voice, speaking in a serious and concerned tone. "Richard, you need to be more careful. The press is watching your every move after that scandal last year. If there's any suspicion of personal involvement with employees—" "Mark, what are you talking about?" Richard's voice sounded confused and slightly irritated. "I'm talking about the way you looked at that employee in the meeting today. Sarah something, Helena mentioned. You made a point to compliment her personally." Sarah felt her blood run cold. Was she being watched? Were her interactions with Richard drawing attention? "She did an excellent job. It's natural to praise competent employees," Richard replied, but there was something defensive in his voice. "Richard, I've known you since college. I saw how you looked at her. And for God's sake, after what happened with Emily, you can't afford to get involved with someone inappropriate." "Inappropriate?" Richard's voice turned icy. "What exactly do you mean by that, Mark? You know exactly what I mean. An employee, probably without a college degree, from a humble background. Richard, think about your position, the company, your family. Sarah felt as if she had been slapped in the face. The words of Richard's friend echoed all her worst fears, confirming that her concerns were justified. She truly was seen as inappropriate for someone like him. "Mark, this conversation ends here," Richard said, his voice sharp. "And next time, choose your words more carefully." Sarah quickly stepped away before anyone came out of the room and found her there. She ran down the stairs, trying to control the tears that threatened to explode. She locked herself in the women's restroom on the 21st floor and finally allowed herself to cry. "Inappropriate," she repeated to herself, looking at her reflection in the mirror, fogged by tears. That was exactly what she was, in his world's eyes. An employee from a humble background who didn't even deserve to be considered a romantic possibility, let alone as the mother of his child. When she managed to compose herself, she returned to her desk determined to keep her distance. No more morning coffees, no more affectionate messages, no more feeding impossible fantasies. She would raise her child alone, with dignity, without depending on anyone. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Around 3 in the afternoon, when Sarah was focused on organizing spreadsheets, Sarah appeared next to her desk. The executive secretary, always impeccable in her grey suit and hair in a perfect bun, was holding a white envelope in her hands. "Sarah Johnson?" she asked, although she already knew the answer. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Smith would like to see you in his office, now if possible." Sarah's heart raced. "Did I do something wrong?" Sarah smiled reassuringly. "On the contrary, apparently he was very impressed with your work in the meeting today." Ms. Martin, who was passing by, overheard the conversation and approached with interest. "Sarah, what does Mr. Smith want with you?" "Administrative matters, just that," Sarah diplomatically replied. "Sarah, can you come with me?" The journey to the 26th floor felt Marina checked her appearance discreetly in the elevator mirror, adjusting her blouse and trying to control her nerves. What did he want? Had he found out about the morning coffees? Or worse, had he noticed something in the meeting that gave her away? "Don't worry," said Sarah, noticing her tension. "Mr. Smith is very kind. He doesn't bite." "If only you knew," thought Marina, unconsciously touching her stomach. The office door was open, and Richard was standing by the window, watching the activity below. When Sarah knocked on the door, he turned and Marina felt that familiar impact of being in his presence again. "Marina, thank you for coming. Sarah, could you please leave us alone?" Sarah exited, closing the door behind her. Marina stood near the entrance, unsure whether to sit or remain standing. "Please, have a seat," Richard said, gesturing to one of the armchairs in front of his desk. "Would you like some coffee, water?" "No, thank you, Mr. Smith." He sat behind the desk, but Marina noticed he seemed less formal than in the morning, more human somehow. "Marina, I'll be direct. I was very impressed with your work today. The quality of the presentation, the accuracy of the data, your analysis. Frankly, it's rare to find this level of competence." "Thank you, sir. I work very hard to do a good job." "That's obvious." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "That's why I want to make you a proposal. I need a personal financial assistant, someone to work directly with me on special projects. The salary would be substantially better, and there would be opportunities for growth." Marina felt the world spin. Working directly with him, every day, keeping the secret she carried. Mr. Smith, it's an honor, but I don't have a college degree. Wouldn't it be more appropriate for someone with better qualifications?" Richard studied her for a long moment. "Marina, may I ask you a personal question?" She nodded, though she feared what was coming. "Why? Do you always underestimate yourself?" Since that day in the elevator, I've noticed you have this tendency to belittle yourself. You are capable, intelligent, dedicated. Why do you think you don't deserve better opportunities?" The question hit Marina like a sharp arrow to the heart. For a few seconds, she saw in him not the powerful CEO, but the kind man who had talked with her late into the night at a holiday party, who had held her hand and spoken about dreams and hopes. "Maybe," she said, choosing her words carefully, "because I've learned that people like me have to work twice as hard to get half the recognition, and even then, there's always someone to remind us that we don't belong in certain places." Richard fell silent, and Marina saw something change in his expression. Understanding, perhaps, or acknowledgement. "What if I told you that you belong exactly where your talent takes you, regardless of where you were born or what family you come from?" His words were beautiful, but Marina thought of the conversation she had overheard earlier, the word inadequate spoken by his friend. "I would appreciate the kindness, Mr. Smith, but I would also say that the real world doesn't work that way. Maybe it's time we start changing that, don't you think?" Marina looked him in the eyes and for a moment almost believed it was possible. She almost told him about the baby growing in her womb, almost revealed that there was already a connection between them that he couldn't even imagine. But then she remembered Marcello's words, the prejudice she would face, the vast difference between their worlds. "Can I think about the proposal, Mr. Smith?" "Of course, but don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often." As Marina left the room, she carried a mix of hope and terror in her chest that threatened to suffocate her. At her desk, Julia waited with an anxious expression. So, what did he want? He offered a promotion, personal financial assistant. "Marie, that's amazing. It's your chance." "Julie," Marina whispered, looking around to make sure no one was listening, "I can't accept. Imagine working alongside him every day, pregnant with his child, without being able to tell the truth. It would be torture. Or it would be your chance to show who you really are, to make him fall in love with the incredible woman you are, even before he knows about the baby." Marina shook her head. "That only works in movies, Julie. In real life, stories like this only end in scandal and heartbreak." But as she spoke, a part of her, small but persistent, whispered that maybe, just maybe, it was possible to rewrite the rules of the game. Maybe it was time to be brave enough to accept that she deserved more than she had always believed. The afternoon was coming to an end, and Marina knew she would have to make a decision that would change the course of her life and the life of the child she carried, a decision that would dangerously bring her closer to the man she secretly loved, but that could also destroy everything if the truth came out the wrong way. The last Saturday of July arrived wrapped in a typical chilly morning of winter in Los Angeles. Marina woke up earlier than usual, not because of work, after all it was Saturday, but because the morning sickness had intensified in recent weeks. Now, almost 3 months pregnant, the symptoms of pregnancy were becoming increasingly difficult to hide. "Honey, you look too thin," Mrs. Smith commented, watching Marina have only tea with dry toast for breakfast. "You seem sick. Don't you want me to make you some chicken soup?" Mrs. Smith, at 65, was a small woman but with a striking presence. Her grey hair was always tied back in a low bun, and her calloused hands from years of hard work carried stories of decades of struggle to raise her daughter alone. She had lived with Marina in the 2-room apartment since her husband abandoned them when Marina was just 5 years old. "No need, Mum. It's just a passing discomfort," Marina replied, avoiding eye contact. Mrs. Smith had that sharp maternal intuition that could detect lies from miles away. "Passenger nothing, Sarah. You've been like this for weeks. And this new habit of not eating meat, feeling nauseous at the smell of frying." Mrs. Smith paused mid-sentence, her eyes widening. "My daughter, You're not... I'm not what, Mum? Sarah tried to sound casual, but her voice came out sharper than usual. Mrs. Smith stepped closer, studying her daughter's face intently. Sarah Johnson, look me in the eyes and tell me the truth. Are you pregnant? The silence that followed was more eloquent than any answer. Sarah lowered her eyes, unable to lie directly to the mother who had always been her biggest ally. "Oh, my God," Mrs. Smith whispered, allowing herself to fall into the plastic chair in the kitchen. "How long, daughter?" "Almost 3 months," Sarah admitted, finally finding the courage to look at her mother. "And the father? Who is he? Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. "It's complicated, Mom. Very complicated." "Complicated how? Is he married? Doesn't want to take responsibility?" Mrs. Smith's voice grew harsher with each question. He doesn't even know I exist, Mom. It was something that happened just once, and then we never talked about it again." Mrs. Smith fell silent for a long moment, processing the information. Finally, she reached out and held Sarah's hand gently. "Daughter, it doesn't matter how it happened. What matters is that now you're going to have a baby, and we will take care of it together, just like we always have with everything in our lives." "Mom!" Sarah began to cry, feeling immense relief at finally sharing the weight of the secret. "You don't need to explain anything more right now. But Sarah, you will have to decide what to do about the father. A child has the right to know their father, even if the circumstances are complicated." A few hours later, Sarah was on the bus heading to downtown. The company had organized a summer party for employees and their families on the rooftop of the building, and all departments were called to help with the organization. Sarah had volunteered to decorate the space, a way to keep herself busy and avoid overthinking her situation. When she arrived on the 26th floor, transformed into a party hall for the occasion, she was impressed by the panoramic view of Los Angeles that the windows offered. Down below, the city buzzed even on a Saturday, but up there, surrounded by colorful bunting and tables decorated with checkered tablecloths, it felt like another world. "Sarah, I'm so glad you came." Julia appeared carrying a box of decorations, wearing a plaid shirt and a skirt she had borrowed from her neighbor. "I'm excited to see this high society event." "Julia, it's just a company summer party. It's not that fancy," Sarah laughed, starting to hang bunting around. The makeshift dance floor. "For someone who has never been above the 22nd floor, it is." Julia looked around, impressed. "Imagine working in a place like this every day." Sarah didn't respond, but thought about Richard's proposal that she still needed to answer. Working there, near him every day, it was tempting and terrifying at the same time. Around 7 in the evening, guests began to arrive. Sarah was in the makeshift kitchen helping to prepare mulled wine and corn pudding when she heard familiar voices approaching. She peeked discreetly and saw Richard entering the hall accompanied by a shorter man wearing glasses who she recognized as Mark, the same one who had called her inappropriate during the conversation she overheard. Richard looked different from the formal image she knew. He wore dark jeans and a light blue long-sleeve shirt, no tie. His hair was slightly tousled, and he seemed more relaxed, almost approachable. "Look who showed up," Julia whispered, having followed her gaze. "He looks great, right? And look how he's looking over here." "Julia, stop!" Sarah stepped away from the kitchen window, trying to hide. "He's not looking anywhere." But Julia was right. Richard seemed to be scanning the room, as if searching for someone specific. When he finally spotted her behind the kitchen counter, his eyes locked onto hers for a few seconds before Mark pulled him into a conversation with other executives. The party was lively, with country music, line dancing, and lots of mulled wine. Sarah kept herself busy serving food and organizing activities, trying to go unnoticed. But around 10 at night, when most employees with young children had already left, she found herself alone in the kitchen washing dishes. "Need any help?" The deep voice behind her made Sarah turn quickly, almost dropping the pot she was washing. Richard was standing at the kitchen entrance, holding 2 empty mugs of mulled wine. "Mr. Smith, You don't need to bother. It's my job," Sarah stammered, nervously drying her hands on her apron. "Sarah, it's Saturday. You're here as a volunteer, not as an employee." He stepped closer, placing the mugs in the sink. "And please, call me Richard. We're at a party, not a work meeting." The soft scent of his cologne, mixed with the ginger and cinnamon of the mulled wine, created a combination that vividly reminded Sarah of that December night. She stepped back slightly, trying to create distance. "How are you feeling at the party?" he asked, grabbing a dish towel and starting to dry the dishes she had washed. The simple and natural gesture surprised her. "Well, thank you. And you, Richard?" The name felt strange on her lips, too intimate after months of thinking of him only as Mr. Smith. "It's been good. It's been a while since I participated in something like this. More authentic, without excessive formalities." He glanced at her sideways. "And you? You look a bit tired." Sarah felt an alarm go off. In her mind, had he noticed her fatigue? "It's work. I've been doing a lot of overtime. That's why. Even though my offer still stands, as a personal assistant, you would have more flexible hours, better conditions." "I'm still thinking," Sarah replied, overly focused on a pot that was already clean. "Can I ask what's making you hesitate? Is it the salary? The responsibilities?" How could she explain that she hesitated because being close to him every day would be a sweet torture, especially pregnant with his child? How to say that she was afraid of fully surrendering to a love that could never be reciprocated? It's a big change. I'm used to my current routine," was the most diplomatic response she could muster. Richard stopped drying the dishes and turned to face her completely. "Sarah, can I be frank with you?" She nodded, though she feared what was coming. "Since that day in the elevator, I notice you, your work, your dedication, the way you treat people. And today, seeing you organizing all this, helping everyone, being kind to all, confirms what I already suspected." "What did you suspect?" Her voice came out in a whisper. "That you are special. And special people deserve special opportunities." Sarah's heart raced so loudly that she was sure he could hear it. For a moment, standing there in the kitchen, lit only by the warm light over the sink, surrounded by the aroma of ginger and cinnamon, she almost believed it was possible, almost revealed the whole truth. "Richard," she began, but was interrupted by Mark's voice calling from the living room. "Richard! Where are you? There's someone here who wants to talk to you." The moment shattered like glass. Richard sighed, clearly frustrated by the interruption. "Sorry, social duties," he said, looking genuinely disheartened. "But Sarah, seriously consider my proposal, okay? And if you have any doubts, any concerns, you can talk to me." When he left, Sarah leaned against the sink, trying to control her breathing. Her feelings for him were intensifying dangerously, and the genuine kindness he showed only made everything more difficult. "Sarah, you disappeared." Julia appeared in the kitchen, slightly tipsy from the mulled wine. "Wow, you're flushed. Did something happen?" "He came to help with the dishes," Sarah explained, still trying to process the conversation. "Seriously? The CEO washing dishes? Sarah, that man is interested in you." "Julia, stop. He was just being polite." "Polite? Polite would be to say hello and leave. Staying here, helping, complimenting you. Sarah, you need to tell him the truth." "I can't." Sarah shook her head vehemently. "Julia, You heard what his friend said. I'm inadequate, and remember, if I tell him about the pregnancy, he'll think I'm trying to pull a fast one. And what if he doesn't? What if he's happy about the news? Sarah laughed bitterly. Julia, men like him don't get happy when poor employees show up pregnant. They get scared of scandal, of blackmail, of having to explain to society how they got involved with someone so beneath them. From the living room, the sounds of music and laughter drifted in. The party continued, but Sarah felt as if she were living two parallel realities. One where she talked naturally with Richard, where he saw her as special, where perhaps a future together was possible, and another where she was just a pregnant employee of a man who could never acknowledge her publicly. "Sarah," Julia said softly, "what if you're wrong? What if you give him a chance to surprise you?" Sarah unconsciously touched her belly, where a new life grew each day. "Julia, I can't take that risk. It's not just about me anymore, it's about my child too. I can't raise a child in a situation of uncertainty, depending on the goodwill of someone who might change their mind at any moment." But as she said this, a part of her, the same part that made her prepare special coffee every morning, whispered that maybe it was time to have a little faith. Maybe it was time to believe she deserved more than she had always thought she did. The party was winding down. When Sarah finally left the kitchen, Richard was still in the living room, talking to some employees, but his eyes searched for her as soon as she appeared. For a few seconds, their gazes locked across the decorated room, and Sarah felt that inexplicable connection that had emerged between them one December night. He started to walk toward her, but Mark intercepted him, whispering something in his ear that changed his expression. Richard looked back at Sarah one last time, discreetly waved, and left with his friend. Sarah stood in the middle of the dismantling living room, feeling like Cinderella. After the clock struck midnight, the magic of the night was over, and she was back to being just Sarah, the pregnant employee who held impossible secrets. But something had changed that night. For the first time, she had seen Richard not as the untouchable CEO, but as a kind man who washed dishes and genuinely cared about the people around him. And for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like if he knew the truth about the child she carried. As she helped finish the cleanup, Sarah made a decision. She would accept the promotion. She would work alongside him, get to know the man behind the title better, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to reveal the truth without destroying everything she had built. It was a huge risk, but for the first time in her life, Sarah Johnson was willing to bet that she deserved to fight for her happiness. August arrived with the typical dry cold of Los Angeles winter, but Sarah barely felt the temperature. The warmth radiating from her body seemed to come from within, a consequence of the pregnancy hormones that, now 4 months along, were becoming increasingly evident. She had accepted the promotion a week after the summer party and now worked on the 26th floor as Richard's personal financial assistant. It was 10 in the morning on a Thursday when Sarah was organizing the reports for the meeting. Sarah Johnson was preparing for the monthly meeting with investors. The new office she occupied was adjacent to Richard's, separated only by a glass wall that allowed for constant visual communication. It was a luxurious environment compared to her old desk, mahogany furniture, plush carpet, a genuine leather armchair, and a partial view of the city. "Sarah, could you bring the third quarter performance numbers?" Richard's voice came through the internal intercom, making her heart race, as it always did. "I'll be right there, Richard," she replied, getting up from her chair. In recent weeks, they had developed a professional intimacy that left her feeling both happy and anxious. He treated her as an equal, sought her opinion on important decisions, and showed a respect for her work that made her feel valued like never before. As she entered his office, Sarah carried a folder filled with colorful graphs. Richard was standing by the window, speaking. On the phone with someone in English, probably foreign investors. He wore a dark grey suit that accentuated his broad shoulders, and his hair was slightly tousled, a sign that he had run his hands through it several times that morning, a habit she had learned to recognize when he was stressed. "Yes, I understand your concerns about the market volatility," he said, gesturing even though the person on the other end couldn't see him. "But our numbers show consistent growth despite the economic uncertainties." Sarah placed the documents on the table and turned to leave, but a sudden wave of dizziness made her lean against the edge of the table. The nausea that had subsided in recent weeks returned with a vengeance that morning, and she had barely managed to drink her morning coffee. "I'll send you the detailed reports by tomorrow morning," Richard continued, still facing away from her. "Thank you for your time." When he hung up the phone and turned around, he found Sarah pale, holding onto the table with both hands. "Sarah, are you okay?" He quickly approached, gently touching her shoulder. "Just a passing dizziness," she murmured, trying to compose herself. "It must be because I didn't have my coffee properly this morning." "Sit here," Richard said, pulling out a chair. "I'll get you a glass of water." "You don't need to bother, I just—" But before she could finish her sentence, the world began to spin violently. Sarah felt her legs wobble, darkness creeping into her peripheral vision. The last thing she remembered was hearing Richard shout her name and feeling strong arms supporting her before everything went black. When she woke up, she was lying on the leather sofa in Richard's office, with him kneeling beside her, holding her hand and looking at her with genuine concern. Emily was there too, holding a glass of water and looking extremely agitated. "Sarah, how do you feel? You gave us a terrible scare," Emily said, offering the glass. "I'm fine," Sarah lied, trying to sit up. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience." "Inconvenience nothing," Richard said firmly. "I'm taking you to the doctor now." "It's not necessary, Richard. I'm already feeling better." "Sarah, you fainted. That's not normal." His voice carried an authority that left no room for argument, but also a concern that made her heart tighten. "Emily, can you call Dr. Henry? Tell him it's an emergency." "Richard, please." Sarah grabbed his arm as he stood up to get his coat. "I don't want to bother your personal doctor. I can go to the clinic after work." He looked at her as if she had said something absurd. "Sarah, you work for me, fainted in my office. It's my responsibility to ensure you're okay. And besides—" He hesitated, as if about to say something more personal, but then composed himself. "Besides, you're important to the company. I can't risk your health." 20 minutes later, Sarah was in the passenger seat of Richard's BMW, watching the city pass by the window as he drove towards St. Joseph's Hospital. It was the first time she was alone with him outside of the work environment, and the closeness made her nervous. "Do you have a history of fainting?" Richard asked, glancing at her in the rear-view mirror. "No, never." Sarah unconsciously touched her stomach. It must have been the heat or work stress. "Sarah, if the work is becoming too much for you, we can adjust your responsibilities. Your health comes first." The kindness in his voice almost made her burst into tears. How could he be so thoughtful, so caring, without even knowing she was carrying his child? "It's not work," she said quietly. "I have some personal issues that might be affecting me." Richard glanced at her quickly before returning his attention to the traffic. "Do you want to talk about it? Sometimes it helps to talk to someone." For a moment, Sarah considered telling him everything. There, in the intimate space of his car, with his gentle voice and genuine concern, it seemed possible to reveal the truth. But then she remembered the conversation between him and Mark, the word inappropriate still echoing in her mind. "It's complicated," was all she managed to say. At the hospital, Richard insisted on accompanying her to Dr. Henry Johnson's office, a 50-year-old man with grey hair and gold-rimmed glasses who had been the Santos family's doctor for decades. "Richard, what a surprise," the doctor greeted, shaking his hand. "Emily said it was an emergency." "Doctor, this is Sarah Johnson, my financial assistant. She fainted in the office this morning." Dr. Henry observed Sarah with professional attention. "Miss Johnson, let's examine what's going on. Richard, can you wait outside?" "No," Sarah said quickly, realizing that if Richard left, the doctor might discover her pregnancy and mention it to him later. "He can stay if he doesn't mind. After all, he brought me." The examination was tense for Sarah. Dr. Henry checked her blood pressure, temperature, heart rate, and asked several questions about her overall condition. She answered carefully, omitting any symptoms that might reveal her pregnancy. "When was your last menstrual period?" the doctor asked, and Sarah felt her blood run cold. "It was some weeks," she replied vaguely, avoiding eye contact with Richard. "Have you been feeling nauseous, excessively tired?" "A little, but I think it's just work stress." Dr. Henry observed her for a few seconds, clearly suspecting something. "Miss Johnson, would it be possible to run some blood tests? I want to check for anemia or other nutritional deficiencies." "Is that necessary?" Sarah asked, trying not to show panic. "It would be prudent," the doctor said, exchanging a glance with Richard. "Fainting in young women can indicate various conditions that need to be investigated." Richard moved closer to the examination table where Sarah was sitting. "Sarah, please get the tests done. I'll cover everything. Don't worry about that." "Richard, I have company insurance." "It doesn't matter. I want to make sure you're okay." The genuine concern in his voice almost broke her. There was the man she loved, desperate to ensure her health, unaware that he was caring for the mother of his child. "Doctor," Sarah said carefully, "how long do these blood tests take to come back?" "It depends on the tests. The basic ones will be ready today. Others may take until tomorrow." Sarah quickly calculated. If she did the test there, they would surely discover the pregnancy, and Dr. Henry, being the family doctor, would probably tell Richard. She needed to buy some time. "Can I do it somewhere else? I prefer to use my insurance, so I don't trouble Mr. Smith." "Sarah," Richard frowned, "why are you complicating this? It's faster and more efficient here." "It's just that—" She searched for a plausible excuse. "I prefer my gynecologist who knows my history. It's probably just hormonal." Dr. Henry watched her intently. "Miss Johnson, if there are gynecological issues involved, it would indeed be better with your trusted doctor. But don't delay in seeking care." "I promise I will today," Sarah said, feeling relieved to escape the situation. On the way back to the office, Richard was clearly worried and slightly frustrated. "Sarah, I don't understand why you refuse to get the tests done with Dr. Henry. He's excellent, has all the technology available. It's just that women's issues are delicate, Richard. I prefer my doctor, who has known me for years." "Are you sure there's nothing more serious? Something you're not telling me?" The question hit her like a lightning bolt. Richard was looking at her so intensely that Sarah feared he could read her thoughts. "Why do you ask that?" "Because—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Because you've been acting strange these past few weeks. More tired, more distant at times, and today that fainting. Sarah, if there's something happening in your personal life, something affecting your health, you can trust me." For a few seconds the car was silent, only the sound of traffic in Los Angeles coming through the windows. Sarah watched Richard's profile as he drove, noticing the tension in his jaw, the genuine concern in his eyes. It would be so simple to tell the truth. Just a few words. "I'm pregnant. The baby is yours." But then she remembered her mother, Mrs. Smith's words, echoing in her mind. "Bosses don't marry their employees, dear. They might have fun with us, but when it comes to commitment, they always choose someone from their own class. Richard, she finally said, thank you for caring about me. Really. But it's just personal issues I need to resolve on my own. Nothing that affects my work or my ability to perform my duties. He looked at her in the rearview mirror again. Sarah, you don't have to solve everything alone. Sometimes it's good to have someone to share problems with. I know, and I really value your concern. But some things we can only face alone. When they returned to the office, Richard insisted that Sarah take the rest of the day off. Go home, rest, see your doctor, and if you need anything, call me. Alone at home that afternoon, Sarah finally allowed herself to cry all the tears she had held back during the day. Richard's kindness, his genuine concern, the way he treated her as if she truly mattered, all of it made keeping the secret even more painful. But now she was sure of one thing: she was hopelessly in love with him. And that made everything infinitely more complicated, because it meant that when she finally revealed the truth about the pregnancy, she wouldn't just be risking her job or financial security, she would be risking her heart. September arrived with its first rains after the long, dry winter, and Sarah felt every drop hitting against the windows of the 26th floor like a harbinger of imminent changes. Now nearly 5 months pregnant, hiding the pregnancy was becoming a Herculean task that required increasingly loose clothing and constant vigilance over her movements. It was a Monday morning when Richard entered. Her office, with a serious expression she had learned to recognize, it indicated he was about to make an important decision. Sarah, can you come to my office? I need to talk to you about something important. Her heart raced. Had he discovered the pregnancy? Had someone said something? Over the weekend, her mother had insisted that she tell the truth before it was too late. Of course, Richard, she replied, following him to the main room. He closed the door behind them and gestured for her to sit in the armchair in front of his desk. Sarah, since you started working directly with me, I've noticed not only your professional competence, but also other things. He paused, as if carefully choosing his words. I've noticed that you're having financial difficulties. Sarah felt her face heat up. Richard, Let me finish, please. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. I've seen that you always bring lunch from home, that your clothes, although always impeccable, have been the same for months. I notice that you never have lunch at the executive restaurant, even though you're entitled to as my assistant. The humiliation burned in Sarah's throat. Being confronted with her financial reality in this way, it was mortifying. I don't see how this affects my work, she said, trying to maintain her dignity. It doesn't affect it. On the contrary, it shows your dedication and responsibility. Richard opened a drawer and took out an envelope. That's why I want to make a proposal. A substantial raise, a premium health plan, double meal vouchers, and an advance so you can settle in better. Sarah looked at the envelope as if it were a snake about to bite her. What kind of advance? $50,000, interest-free, to be deducted from your salary over 2 years. The amount left her breathless. $50,000 would solve all her financial problems, ensure security for her and the baby, allow her to move to a better place. Why? She asked, suspicious. Because you're worth it. Because your work is exceptional, and I don't want to lose you to the competition. He hesitated before continuing. And because I care about your well-being. The last words were spoken in a lower, almost intimate tone that made Sarah's heart race dangerously. There was something in his eyes that went beyond professional concern. Richard, she began, but he interrupted her. Sarah, I know there's a connection between us. Something that goes beyond the professional relationship. He stood up, walking to the window. Since that night at the New Year's party, Sarah's blood ran cold. He remembered. After all these months pretending nothing had happened, he was finally mentioning that night. "We shouldn't talk about this," she said quickly, standing up as well. "Why not? We're two single adults. There's nothing wrong with admitting we feel something for each other." Sarah felt tears threatening to escape. If he only knew about the baby. If he knew that night had resulted in something much more than a simple connection. "Richard, you don't understand. I can't accept this money." "Why not?" "Because," she swallowed hard, "because it would seem like I'm being bought, that I'm accepting favors in exchange for other things." His expression changed instantly. "Sarah, do you think I'm offering this in exchange for sexual favors?" "That's not what I meant." "That's exactly what you meant." His voice turned cold, hurt. "Do you think I'm the kind of man who uses my position to coerce employees?" "Richard, no." "Sarah, if I just wanted to be with you, I wouldn't need to bribe you. I thought you knew what kind of person I am." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Sarah saw the hurt in his eyes and felt as if she had just wounded something precious between them. "You're right," she finally said, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry for thinking that. You're an honorable man. You've always been kind to me. The distrust has nothing to do with you. It has to do with me." "With you how?" "With the fact that women like me learn early to distrust excessive generosity from powerful men." The words came out more bitter than she intended. "We learn that when something seems too good to be true, it probably is." Richard watched her for a long moment. "And what if I told you my offer has no ulterior motives, that it's purely professional?" "I would say you just admitted you feel something for me, so it can't be purely professional." He sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "Sarah, you're right. It's not purely professional, but it's also not manipulative. It's just a man trying to take care of a woman he cares about." His words hit her like a punch to the chest. He cared about her. The man she loved, the father of her child, had just admitted he cared about her, and she was rejecting everything out of pride, fear, and a stubbornness that might be hurting not just herself, but the baby she carried. "I can't accept," she repeated more firmly this time. "Why, Sarah? Give me a reason that makes sense." "Because if I accept, it won't just be about my work anymore. It will be about what I feel for you, and that can't happen." "Why can't it happen?" The question hung in the air between them. Sarah knew she needed to be honest as far as she could. "Because you're Richard Smith, heir to a business empire, educated in the best schools, raised in an elite family. And I'm Sarah Johnson, daughter of a seamstress, raised in East Los Angeles, who worked as a cleaner to afford an education." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "Our lives are incompatible, Richard. Our worlds don't mix." "That's prejudice, Sarah." "No, Richard, that's reality." He stepped closer to her, stopping just inches away. "And what if I didn't care about that? What if to me you were just Sarah, the intelligent, hard-working, honorable woman I admire?" For a moment, Sarah almost gave in, almost told him about the pregnancy, almost accepted that it was possible. But then she remembered the conversation between him and Mark, the word inappropriate, still stinging like an open wound. "Your friends care, your family cares, society cares." She stepped back, creating physical distance. "And sooner or later, you would care too." "Sarah." "Richard, thank you for the offer, truly, but I can't accept." She left the room before he could respond, closing the door behind her with a care that contrasted with the emotional storm unfolding inside her. That night, Sarah got home and found her mother sewing at the kitchen table, as she always did to supplement the family income. Mrs. Smith looked up when her daughter entered, immediately noticing her downcast expression. "What's wrong, dear?" Sarah told her everything. About Richard's offer, about his words, about her categorical refusal. Mrs. Smith listened in silence, only making small sounds of understanding when appropriate. "Sarah," she finally said, "can I ask you a question? Did you reject the offer out of pride or out of fear?" "Mum, if it was pride that made you leave, then you did the right thing. A dignified woman doesn't accept favors from a man. But if it was fear, then perhaps you're missing an opportunity not just for yourself, but for my grandson too." Sarah touched her belly, where the baby was becoming increasingly active. "Mum, what if he finds out about the pregnancy and thinks I hid it to get money? What if he thinks it was all planned? What if he finds out and is happy? What if he wants to take responsibility for the child and care for both of you?" "Mum, you always told me that a boss doesn't marry the maid." Mrs. Smith sighed, putting down her sewing. "Honey, I said that to protect you, so you wouldn't get your hopes up. But sometimes there are exceptions, and from what you tell me about this man, maybe he is an exception." Sarah spent the night awake, tossing in bed, weighing all the possibilities. The next morning, she arrived at the office determined to keep a professional distance from Richard, but when she entered his office, she found fresh flowers on his desk, a simple bouquet of colourful gerberas, with a card that simply said, "Sorry if the offer seemed inappropriate. My intention was just to show how much I value you." Ah. The kindness of the gesture almost broke her. Richard had completely understood her reasons and was apologizing for something that wasn't even his fault. It was exactly this kind of consideration that made her love him even more and made everything more impossible. Throughout the morning, they tried to maintain a professional normalcy, but the tension was palpable. Richard was formally polite, but distant. Sarah felt as if she had lost something precious in their conversation the day before. Around noon, she made a decision she had been considering for weeks. She opened her computer and began to type. "Dear Mr. Richard Smith, I am writing to inform you of my decision to resign from my position as personal financial assistant, requesting the fulfillment of the notice period as established in my contract. My departure is not related to professional issues. On the contrary, these have been the most rewarding months of my career. The decision is based on personal matters that require significant changes in my life. I thank you for the opportunity and trust placed in my work. Sincerely, Sarah Johnson." She reread the letter several times, her hands trembling slightly. It was the only way to protect herself and the baby. Staying close to Richard, loving him as she did, while hiding such a big secret, was becoming unsustainable. She printed the letter, placed it in an envelope, and walked to his office. Richard was on the phone but gestured for her to come in. Sarah placed the envelope on his desk and quickly left before she lost her courage. 5 minutes later, he appeared in her office, holding the letter with an expression of shock and something that looked like pain. "Sarah, what is this?" "It's self-explanatory, Richard." "Personal matters?" "What personal matters?" His voice was strained, almost desperate. "Does this have to do with our conversation yesterday?" "Partially, yes." "Sarah, if it's about the financial offer, forget it. Let's pretend I never offered anything. You stay in your position, and I keep a professional distance." "It's not just about that, Richard." She stood up, organizing some papers to avoid looking directly at him. "It's about the fact that I can't work here anymore." "Why?" The simple question carried so much desperation that Sarah almost gave in, almost told him the whole truth right there. Instead, she forced herself to stick to her decision. "Because sometimes The best way to protect something you value is to step away before it's too late. Richard was silent for a long moment, studying her expression. Sarah, you're running away. I'm protecting myself. You're running away from me, or are you running away from what you feel for me? The question hit her hard. That was exactly what she was doing, running away from her own feelings, from the impossibility of the situation, from the truth she couldn't reveal. Richard, please accept my resignation and make things easier for both of us. He folded the letter carefully, placing it in his suit pocket. I won't accept it. You don't have a choice. I do. And my choice is to fight for you, Sarah, even if you don't want me to. Before she could respond, he left the room, leaving her alone with her heart racing and the certainty that she had just complicated an already impossible situation even further. That night, alone in her apartment, Sarah held her belly where her child was growing and whispered, I'm sorry, my love. Mommy is trying to do what's right for both of us, even if it's the hardest thing she's ever done in her life. But deep down, she knew she was running away, not just from Richard, but from the possibility that maybe, just maybe, they could have been happy together. October arrived, bringing the first heavy rains of the spring in Los Angeles, and with them, a tension in the office that everyone could feel but no one dared to comment on. It had been 2 weeks since Sarah had submitted her resignation letter, and Richard still refused to officially accept it. The situation had created an awkward impasse that affected the entire 26th floor. Sarah was now 5.5 months pregnant, and even with increasingly loose blouses and long blazers, her condition was starting to become evident to anyone who looked closely. She had developed a technique of always carrying folders or documents in front of her body and avoided standing for too long when other people were present. It was a rainy Thursday, around 7 in the evening, when most employees had already left. Sarah had stayed in the office to finish some reports, hoping that Richard had already gone home. In recent days, they had developed a careful dance of mutual avoidance. He would leave for meetings when she arrived, and she would be absent when he returned, the sound of the rain hitting against the windows of the office. The 26th floor created an almost melancholic atmosphere. Sarah was organizing the files on her desk when she heard footsteps in the hallway. She expected it to be a cleaning staff member, but when she looked up, she saw Richard standing at the door of her office. He looked different. His hair was slightly disheveled, his tie loose, and there was a look of exhaustion on his face that she had never seen before. More than that, there was a determination in his eyes that made her feel as if she was about to be confronted with something she could no longer avoid. Sarah, I need to talk to you, he said, entering the room without waiting for permission. Richard, it's past working hours. Can you wait until tomorrow? No. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it as if he wanted to ensure she wouldn't escape again. You've waited too long. Sarah felt her heart race. There was something different about his posture, an urgency that put her on alert. If it's about the resignation letter, it's not about the resignation letter, he interrupted her. It's about you avoiding me for 2 weeks. It's about you looking at me with that guilty expression every time our paths cross. It's about the fact that you're hiding something from me. I'm not hiding anything. Richard laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Sarah, I observe people for a living. I know when someone is lying, and you've been lying to me for months. She stood up from her chair, instinctively positioning a stack of documents in front of her body. Richard, I don't know what you're talking about. You don't know. He took a few steps closer, studying her face intently. Sarah, you've changed. Physically, emotionally. You're more tired, more cautious. Whenever someone mentions family or children, you tense up. And this morning, when Sarah mentioned her daughter's pregnancy, you completely paled. Sarah's blood ran cold. He had been watching, noticing, details she thought she had hidden well. Maybe I'm just stressed about work. Sarah, stop. His voice softened, almost pleading. Please, stop lying to me. Whatever is happening, we can figure it out together. The "we" in his sentence almost broke her. For a moment, Sarah considered telling him everything. There, alone with him in the room, lit only by the soft light of the desk lamp, with the sound of rain creating an involuntary intimacy, it seemed possible to reveal the truth. But then she remembered all the reasons she had hidden the pregnancy for so long. Richard, some things don't have solutions. Some situations are just impossible. Impossible how? He took a few more steps toward her. Sarah, do you think there's anything in the world we couldn't face together if we wanted to? The question hit her like a lightning bolt. There was so much confidence in his voice, so much certainty, that together they could overcome any obstacle. If only he knew she was carrying his child. You don't understand, Richard. It's not about wanting or not wanting. It's about reality. What reality? Sarah took a deep breath, preparing to be more honest than she had been in months. The reality that I fell in love with you, madly, completely in love, and that love is destroying me because I know it can never lead to anything. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the rain intensifying outside. Richard was watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Sarah, he finally said, his voice hoarse with emotion, do you think I don't feel the same way about you? Richard, do you think I wake up every morning thinking about you by chance? That I make excuses to call you into my office just because I like your work? He stepped closer, now just a meter away. Sarah, I've been in love with you for months, since that night at the holiday party. His words hit her like an emotional tsunami. He remembered that night, and he was in love with her. You can't be, she whispered, feeling tears threaten to escape. Why can't I? Because you are you, and I am me. Because when your friends find out, they'll advise you to stay away. Because your family will never accept me. Because the difference between us is too great. Sarah, look at me. His voice was firm now, authoritative. Look into my eyes and tell me you really believe I care about any of that. She forced herself to meet his gaze and saw an intensity that made her tremble. There was love, yes, but also a determination that frightened her. Richard, you don't understand. There are things you don't know about me, things that would make everything even more complicated. Then tell me. I can't. Why not? Because, her voice faltered, because when you know, you'll change your mind about us. Richard stood still for a few seconds, processing her words. Then slowly, his gaze dropped from her face to her body, noticing for the first time how she kept the documents strategically positioned in front of her torso. Sarah, he said, his tone shifting, put those papers down. What? Put the papers down. Now. There was something in his voice that brooked no disobedience. Trembling, Sarah let the documents fall onto the desk. Immediately, Richard saw what she had been hiding for months, the unmistakable curve of her belly, evidencing an advanced pregnancy. The shock on his face was instant and devastating. He took a step back, as if he had been physically punched, his mouth opening without making a sound. You're pregnant, he finally said, the phrase coming out more as an incredulous statement than a question. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. How long? 5.5 months, she whispered. Richard quickly did the math, his eyes widening as the reality set in. The holiday party, our night together. Yes, it's my child. It wasn't a question, but Sarah nodded anyway. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard stepped away, walking to the window, running his hands through his hair repeatedly. Outside, the rain continued to batter the city, creating streams in the streets and turning Los Angeles into a blurred watercolor. 5.5 months, he repeated, not turning around. You hid this from me for 5.5 months. Richard, I can explain. Explain. He turned abruptly, and Sarah saw that his eyes were shining with held-back tears. Sarah, you hid from me that I'm going to be a father. I tried to tell you several times, but what? His voice was rising, heavy with emotion. But you thought I didn't deserve to know, that it wasn't important for me to know I'm going to be a dad? That's not it. Then what is it? Did you think I wouldn't take responsibility? That I would run away when I found out? Sarah felt tears rolling down her face. I thought you would think it was planned, that I was trying to pull a fast one, get money, take advantage of the situation. Sarah, his voice lowered but still heavy with pain, do you really think I would think that of you? Your friend Mark would think so. Your family would think so. Everyone would think so. I'm not everyone. He slammed his fist against the wall, making Sarah jump. I'm the father of this child. I had the right to know. You're right, she admitted, sobbing. You had the right to know, but I was scared, Richard. So scared. Scared of what? Of losing you before I even had you for real. Of being judged, humiliated, rejected. Of building expectations that would be shattered when reality hit. Richard stepped closer again, stopping right in front of her. His hands trembled as he reached toward her belly. May I? He asked, his voice breaking. Sarah nodded, and he gently touched her abdomen. The baby, as if sensing the presence of the father, moved visibly under his hands. Richard closed his eyes, a tear finally escaping. It's real, he murmured. I'm going to be a dad. Richard, I'm so sorry for hiding it. I wanted to tell you, but every day it got harder, and I didn't know how. He silenced her by placing a finger gently over her lips. Sarah, we need to talk. A lot. About everything. About the baby. About us. About the future. I know. But right now, he said, carefully wrapping her in his arms, right now I just want to hold the mother of my child and process the fact that in a few months I'm going to have a family. Sarah allowed herself to relax in his arms for the first time in months, feeling the warmth of his body, the familiar scent of his cologne, the sense of security she always felt when she was near him. And Sarah, he said against her hair, yes? Forget the resignation letter. You're not going anywhere. We're going to sort this out together, just like it should have been from the start. Outside, the storm continued, but for the first time in months, Sarah felt like she was home. The secret had been revealed, and despite the fear of what would come next, she was no longer alone. She was with the man she loved, the father of her child, and maybe, just maybe, it would be possible to build something beautiful from the truth that had finally been revealed. 3 weeks had passed since the revelation of the pregnancy, and Sarah's life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. Richard not only embraced fatherhood naturally, but he had also become the most caring and protective man she had ever known. Every day he drove her to and from work, insisted she have prenatal care at the best hospital in the city, and had even hired a nutritionist to monitor her diet. It was a sunny November morning when Sarah woke up with a strange feeling that something was different. She couldn't quite identify what it was, but there was an unease in the air that made her uncomfortable. Richard had spent the night at her apartment, something that had become routine in recent weeks, despite Mrs. Smith's initial protests. "Good morning, my princess," Richard whispered, gently kissing her neck. His hands automatically found her belly, where the baby was becoming increasingly active. "How are you two doing today?" 2? Sarah turned to face him, smiling. We still don't know the baby's gender. Father's instinct, he laughed, stroking her belly. I'm sure it's a girl. She'll be as beautiful as her mother. The domestic happiness they had built in recent weeks felt almost surreal to Sarah. It was as if they were living in a bubble, protected from the outside world, and all the complications she had always known would come. But bubbles always burst, and hers was about to explode in a more dramatic way than she could have ever imagined. At 9 in the morning, when they arrived at the office, Sarah was waiting for them at reception with a worried expression that immediately put Sarah on alert. Mr. Smith, I need to speak with you urgently, said the secretary, nervously glancing at Sarah. Sarah, you can speak in front of Sarah. She has no more secrets from me, Richard replied, wrapping his arm protectively around her waist. Sarah hesitated, looking around to make sure there was no one else nearby. Sir, there are reporters in the lobby, many reporters, and photographers. Sarah's blood ran cold. Reporters? It seems someone leaked information about your relationship and the pregnancy, Sarah continued, her voice lowering. The phone won't stop ringing. Journalists from various outlets want comments. Richard tensed beside Sarah. How did they find out? I don't know, sir. But there are photos. What photos? Sarah's voice came out sharper than usual. Sarah hesitated again before pulling her phone from her pocket. It appeared on the Los Angeles Now website an hour ago. The headline was devastating. Scandal. In the elite of Los Angeles, CEO of Titan Enterprises impregnates humble employee. Below, a series of photos. Sarah getting into Richard's BMW, the two leaving the hospital together. He protectively placing his hand on her back in the parking lot of the supermarket, where they had gone to buy things for the baby. Sarah felt her legs weaken. It was exactly what she had always feared would happen. How did they get these photos? Someone followed us, Richard said, his voice cold with anger. Someone knew exactly where to be to get the best shots. Sarah cleared her throat uncomfortably. Sir, there's more. The shareholder board has called an emergency meeting for today at 2 in the afternoon, and your friend Mark has called several times. He said it's urgent. Oh my God, Sarah whispered, instinctively holding her belly. I knew this would happen. I knew. Sarah, calm down, Richard said, hugging her. We'll figure this out. How, Richard? How are we going to fix this? The tears she had been holding back began to spill. Look at the headline. Humble employee. That's exactly how they will always see me, as the poor girl who got pregnant by her rich boss. I don't care what they think, but you should care. Sarah pulled away from him, her voice rising. Your company, your reputation, your family, all of it is at risk because of me. Before Richard could respond, the elevator opened, and Mark appeared, looking more agitated than Sarah had ever seen him. His hair was disheveled, his tie crooked, and he was carrying several newspapers under his arm. Richard, we need to talk, now, Mark said, barely acknowledging Sarah. Mark, you know Sarah. I do, and it's exactly about her that we need to talk. Mark looked directly at Sarah, his expression not exactly hostile, but definitely cold. Miss Johnson, may I speak with my client privately? Sarah stays, Richard said firmly. Anything you have to say can be said in front of her. Mark sighed, clearly frustrated. Very well. Richard, the scandal is spreading like wildfire. It's not just about the relationship. They're speculating about harassment, abuse of power, favoritism. The company's stock has already dropped 8% just this morning. Sarah felt as if she had been slapped in the face. Harassment. That's the narrative that's forming, Mark explained, his voice professional but cutting. powerful CEO takes advantage. A vulnerable employee impregnates the woman and then tries to buy her silence with promotions. "This is ridiculous," Richard exploded. "None of this is true." "It doesn't matter if it's true or not, Richard. What matters is how it looks." Mark turned to Sarah. "Miss Johnson, do you understand that your presence here now is only making the situation worse? Every photo of you together, every public appearance, feeds the narrative that Richard is using his influence to protect you." "Mark, enough," Richard said, his voice dangerously low. "Richard, I'm your lawyer and your friend for 15 years. My job is to protect you, even when you don't want to be protected." Mark opened one of the newspapers he was carrying. "Look at this. Cinderella or Opportunist? The true story of the pregnancy that could bring down a family empire." Sarah read the headline and felt nausea rise in her throat. It was worse than her worst nightmares. "And there's more," Mark continued relentlessly. "They're investigating your background. They found out you were a cleaner before being promoted. They're painting a picture of calculated manipulation." "Stop," Sarah said, her voice coming out in a strangled whisper. "Please, stop." But Mark didn't stop. "The board is in a panic, Richard. They're talking about a temporary suspension, about you selling your shares to avoid further damage to the company. And your mother is on her way." "My mother?" Mrs. Margaret called this morning. She's devastated, in her words. She wants to understand how you could get involved in such a problematic situation. Sarah couldn't take it anymore. Mark's words, the coldness of his tone, the raw reality of what her presence in Richard's life was causing, it all became too much. She turned and ran to the bathroom, where she vomited everything in her stomach, not knowing if it was because of the pregnancy or the emotional stress. When she came out of the bathroom a few minutes later, she found Richard and Mark in a heated discussion in the hallway. "I'm not going to abandon Sarah and my child because of some sensationalist journalists." "Richard, you're not thinking clearly. This scandal could destroy everything your family has built over decades." "Mark, you're being a hypocrite." Sarah stepped closer, her voice trembling but determined. "When we met, you called me inadequate. Now you pretend to be protecting Richard from a manipulator." Mark had the decency to look ashamed. "Miss Johnson, you don't need to explain. You were right from the start." Sarah turned to Richard. "And you should have listened to him." "Sarah, no." Richard grabbed her arm. "Don't let them get into your head. Richard, look around. Look at what our relationship is causing. Your company is losing money. Your reputation is being destroyed. Your family is embarrassed." She took a deep breath, making the hardest decision of her life. "I'm going to leave your life." "No!" "Yes, it's the only way to protect you and the baby too. Imagine what it will be like for a child to grow up in the middle of this scandal. Sarah, we can get through this together." "How?" Tears were streaming freely down her face now. "Tell me how, Richard. How are we going to overcome the prejudice, the press, your family, the board? How are we going to raise a child in an environment where I will always be seen as the opportunist who destroyed his father's reputation?" Richard fell silent, clearly searching for an answer he couldn't find. "I'm officially resigning today," Sarah continued. "I'm leaving Los Angeles, going back to my hometown. I'll raise our child far away from all of this." "Sarah, don't do this to me." "I'm not doing this to you, Richard. I'm doing this for you." She gently touched his face. "Because I love you too much to let our story end up destroying us. Everything you built. And what about me? What does this do to me, losing you and my child? You will survive. Men like you always survive. And when the scandal passes, when your life returns to normal, you will understand that I made the right decision." Before he could respond, the sound of the elevator interrupted them. The doors opened to reveal an elegant woman in her 60s, perfectly styled blonde hair, wearing a Chanel suit that probably cost more than Sarah's annual salary. It was unmistakable that she was Richard's mother. They had the same brown eyes and the same proud bearing. "Richard," said Mrs. Margaret Smith, her voice icy, "we need to talk. Immediately." Her eyes swept over Sarah from head to toe, noting the prominent belly, the simple clothes, the makeup smudged by tears. The look of disdain that crossed her face was subtle, but Sarah caught it perfectly. "Mother," Richard said, tensing up, "this is Sarah, the woman I love and the mother of my child." "Yes, I figured," Mrs. Margaret replied, not even acknowledging Sarah. "Richard, come with me. We have much to discuss." "Everything you have to say can be said in front of Sarah." "No, Richard, it cannot." Her voice left no room for discussion. "Now." Sarah saw the tension on Richard's face and made the final decision. "Go with your mother, Richard. Listen to what she has to say." "Sarah, go. I'll be fine." But as he walked away, with his mother and Mark, Sarah knew she would never be fine again. She had made the decision to protect the man she loved, even if it meant destroying her own happiness. As she waited for the elevator to descend and leave that building for the last time as an employee of Titan Enterprises, Sarah touched her belly where her daughter was growing, because somehow she was also sure it would be a girl. "Don't worry, my princess," she whispered. "Mommy will take care of both of us. Always." The scandal had erupted, the cards were on the table, and now it remained to be seen if love would be strong enough to withstand all the storms that lay ahead. 3 months after leaving Los Angeles, Sarah was in the living room of the small house she had rented in Napa Valley when she felt the first contractions. It was Christmas Eve, and the rare snow that fell in the region gently covered the rooftops of the surrounding houses, creating an almost magical scene that contrasted with the physical pain beginning to intensify in her body. "Mom!" she shouted to Mrs. Smith, who was in the kitchen preparing the Christmas dinner. "I think it's time." What followed was a rush to St. Joseph's Hospital in the city. Sarah had chosen Napa Valley to have the baby not only for the tranquility of the mountain town, but because it was far enough from Los Angeles to avoid any chance of an accidental encounter with Richard. In the 3 months since she left Titan Enterprises, Sarah had been following the unfolding of the scandal from afar. The headlines eventually faded. Other news took their place, and Richard had managed to stabilize the company. She knew this because, secretly, she still accessed financial news websites and saw when Titan's stock began to rise again. What she didn't know was that Richard had hired a private investigator to find her, and that 2 weeks ago he discovered where she was living. In the hospital, between contractions that intensified with each passing minute, Sarah made a decision she had been considering for weeks. She asked the nurse to bring the papers for relinquishment of paternity, documents that, once signed by her, would free Richard from any legal or financial responsibility for the child. "Are you sure about this, dear?" Mrs. Smith asked, holding her daughter's hand as another contraction gripped her. "A man has the right to know his own daughter." "Mom," Sarah said between gasps, "I don't want her to grow up in the middle of a scandal. I don't want her to always be seen as the mistake that almost destroyed her father's reputation." Her voice broke with emotion and physical pain. "I want her to have a simple, happy life, away from all this confusion." At 11:47 p.m. on December 24th, Helena Marina Smith came into the world. She was a small but healthy baby, with dark hair like her, mothers and eyes that, even as a newborn, resembled her father's. When they placed her in Sarah's arms, she immediately knew she had made the right decision to protect that child from a world that would never fully accept her. "She's perfect," Mrs. Smith whispered, tears in her eyes. "She is," Sarah agreed, gently kissing her daughter's forehead, "and she will be ours, only ours." 2 hours later, with Helena sleeping in her arms and the relinquishment papers signed on the hospital table, Sarah closed her eyes and tried to imagine what the future would hold. She had secured a job at a small accounting firm in Napa Valley, earning less than she did in Los Angeles, but it would be enough to raise her daughter with dignity. What she didn't expect was that when she woke up the next morning, she would find Richard sitting in the chair next to her bed, holding the relinquishment papers with a look of deep pain in his eyes. "Good morning," he said softly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to be there. Sarah quickly sat up in bed, checking to see if Helena was still sleeping in, the crib beside her. "How did you find me?" "Private investigator. It wasn't hard. You used the company health plan for your prenatal care." He held up the papers. "Sarah, what is this?" "It's what it looks like. You are free from any responsibility for Helena." "Helena?" His eyes softened. "That's her name. Helena Marina Smith. And before you ask, no, it's not in honor of your secretary. It's in honor of my grandmother." Richard stood up. She approached the crib, observing her daughter for the first time. Her breath caught as she saw his features in the delicate, little face of the baby. "She's beautiful," she whispered. "She's perfect. Richard, you shouldn't be here." "Where else would I be? My daughter was born yesterday, and you thought I wouldn't want to meet her." Sarah felt tears threatening to escape. "I thought it would be better for everyone." "Better for whom, Sarah? For you, for me, for her?" He turned to face her, and she saw that his eyes were also moist. "Or better for the people who judge our relationship?" "Richard, nothing has changed. The problems that separated us still exist." "You're right. Nothing has changed." He tore the renunciation papers in half, throwing them in the trash. "I'm still crazy about you. I still want to build a family with you. And now we have a beautiful daughter who needs both parents. And the scandal? Your company? Your family?" Richard laughed, but it wasn't a joyful sound. "Sarah, do you want to know what happened after you left? My mother tried to convince me to pay you to disappear. The board suggested I claim that the pregnancy was an extortion attempt. Mark devised strategies to publicly destroy your reputation. And I told them all to go. To hell." His voice grew stronger, more determined. "I told my mother that if she couldn't accept you, she would lose her son and granddaughter. I fired 2 advisors who suggested defaming you. And I warned Mark that if he spoke ill of you one more time, our friendship would end right there." Sarah watched him in disbelief. "You did that?" "I did more than that." He sat on the edge of the bed. "I sold my share of Titan Enterprises." "What?" "I sold it to my partners. For a fair price, but I sold it. The company was a burden, Sarah. I carried the weight of expectations that were never mine, of a reputation I didn't choose to build." Sarah couldn't process what she was hearing. "Richard, you threw your life away for me." "I didn't throw my life away. I chose my life." He took her hands. "Sarah, with the money from the sale, I bought a small cafe in Silver Lake. It will be ours. Our cafe, our life, our terms." "A cafe? Remember the coffees you used to make for me every morning? I never asked, but I know it was you. The investigator confirmed it, you. Showed up early every day, came up to my floor, made special coffee, and left little notes." Sarah felt her face heat up. "How did you find out?" "The security cameras. But more importantly, I knew because no coffee I had after tasted the same. There was love in those cups, Sarah, love that I want to feel every day for the rest of my life." Sarah began to cry softly, and Richard instinctively got up to hold her. When the baby calmed in his arms, looking at him with those dark eyes identical to his, Sarah saw something break inside him. "She's my daughter," he said, his voice choked. "Our daughter, and I won't let her grow up thinking her father didn't want her." "Richard, Sarah, I know you're scared." I know it's terrifying to bet on a relationship that the whole world will judge, but look at her. He gently lifted Sarah. Look at what we created together. This is worth fighting for. Sarah watched the man she loved holding the daughter they had created together, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine that maybe it was possible. Maybe love really was enough to overcome prejudices, judgments, and social differences. What if it doesn't work out? She whispered. What if it does? He moved closer, still holding Sarah in his arms. Sarah, you've spent your whole life protecting yourself from the possibility of getting hurt, but sometimes it's worth taking the risk. 3 months later, during Mardi Gras in Silver Lake, Sarah pushed a colorful cart through the streets filled with revelers. The cart had a sign that read, Helena's Treats, and was filled with gourmet chocolate truffles she made to sell during the holiday. Sarah slept peacefully in the sling on her mother's chest, protected from the noise of the drums and the contagious joy of the crowd. Sarah had decided to return to Los Angeles 2 weeks after the hospital meeting, not to go back to being Richard's employee, but to be his partner in every sense. They had opened Helena's Cafe, a small coffee shop in Silver Lake that specialized in specialty coffees, where each cup was made with the same care as those first mysterious coffees that changed their lives. Sarah! Sarah! Look at this! Sarah turned and saw Richard approaching, dressed in a simple costume, carrying a bag full of money. We sold all the coffees this morning, all of them, she laughed, feeling truly happy for the first time in a long time. Really? Even the cardamom coffee you said no one would like? Especially the cardamom coffee. He kissed her quickly, careful not to wake Sarah. Sarah, I think we've found our calling. Around them, Los Angeles celebrated with vibrant colors, loud music, and unrestrained joy. Sarah observed the diverse crowd, rich and poor, black and white, locals and migrants, all united by the magic of Mardi Gras, and realized that maybe the city was big enough to embrace improbable love stories like theirs. Richard, she said, adjusting Sarah in the sling, thank you. For what? For teaching me that sometimes it's worth believing we deserve to be happy. He smiled, that smile that had won her heart that day in the elevator 14 months before. Sarah, our story is just beginning. Us, Sarah, the cafe, our life together, it's only the first chapter. As they walked through the streets of Silver Lake, pushing the cart of chocolate truffles and planning the next recipes for the cafe, Sarah knew he was right. They had faced prejudices, scandals, family, pressures, and their own insecurities. But in the end, love. It had been stronger than all of this. The love and the courage to believe that two people from different worlds could build a new world, where differences did not separate but enriched. A world where the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the burnt sugar scent of chocolate truffles created the perfect soundtrack for a love story that began with small gestures and transformed into something epic. A story that proved that sometimes the most unlikely endings are also the truest.